Hello and welcome back to the Muscle Engineer podcast. I am, as always, your host, Sotak Andrei, and you're listening to episode 35, which is, as promised, the second part of my conversation with Greg Nuckols. Now, in the first episode, which was episode 33, if you haven't listened to that, make sure to check that out first. But in that episode, we mostly touched on things you can't do much about when it comes to getting stronger. This one is something that is less tangible, but at the same time more malleable, if you wish, and that is mostly your mindset and your attitude, and also the environment where you train. So we talk about internal and external environment, what's going on in your head, and then what's going on outside of your head and in the gym where you train. So you will hear some very cool stories, you'll hear some very cool studies that have been done in this area. I think you'll find this whole topic fascinating because I sure did. So I hope you enjoy, and without further ado, let's get into episode 35 with Greg Nuckols. So we mostly touched on factors that are kind of set in stone and can't really modify it, like build and force production capabilities of your muscles and stuff like that. Now I want to talk about the factors that we can change, and let's talk about internal first. So talk about mental stuff. Now for this, there have been a couple of studies you reviewed on your one of your web pages. It was an older one. And these, quote, forestry studies, which have been just mind-blowing to me, and it really shows you the power of belief. Could you, talk about these and your views, I guess, on this whole topic? Because I'm sure that people put way too many limitations on themselves. I know I probably do that myself. Like I had for a long time this 100-kilo bench seemed some sort of barrier, and I just couldn't overcome it mentally. And the same with the squat. For a while, anything over 100 was just a lot, in my head. And I know it's going to be a long question, but I remember you had at one point one of your few YouTube videos. You mentioned how at some point you went away from Travis's gym and you trained at a more commercial gym, I guess, and your lifts kind of stagnated because you got away from that environment and you weren't used to seeing guys just lift monster weights day in and day out.
Yeah, so the first part of that question, the couple of studies that I've referenced before. So one of them was it was conducted on the British national powerlifting team. And this is actually one of my favorite studies of all time. So because the human element of it is so choice. So apparently back in the early 2000s, the British national IPF affiliate powerlifting team wanted to use steroids and get away with it. And so they hit up their coach and said hey coach, can you get us gear? And he, being an ethical man, thought to himself no, that's cheating. I'm not going to do that. But then him, being a wily bastard, said oh, but I can use this to study the placebo effect. So what he did is he had his lifters max, and then 2 weeks later he gave them saccharin tabs,
Sweeteners.
And told them that it was a fast-acting steroid, and then had them max again. So first off, the study was published in 2001, so the internet exists at this point. People should be able to Google what are the effects of steroids and see oh, it makes me stronger by helping me build muscle over a prolonged period of time. Not I take a pill and it turns me into Superman. So it shouldn't have done anything. And then so they took the pills, they maxed again, and across squat, bench, and deadlift, which they were very highly trained at. Like the average bench press in the study was like 190 kilos. Average squat and deadlift were like 270-ish, something like that. So like strong dudes, like clearly very well trained. They got an average of like 4 to 5% stronger across all 3 lifts, like automatically, just because they took this pill that their coach told them was a fast acting steroid. And like 4 to 5% may not sound like much, but like that's a big difference in like elite competitive lifting. We're talking putting, if someone totals like 1,700, we're talking putting like 35 pounds on their total, like automatically, which very well could be a year's worth of progress, if not more, for a lifter at that level.
It's 85 pounds, not 35. 5%.
Oh yeah, that was
Even
2%.
better.
Yeah, so that's even bigger. So yeah, huge increases automatically. So then he kept giving them these pills. They trained for 2 weeks while taking these pills that they thought were steroids. He came back after 2 weeks, and he got like subjective feedback from them about how their training was going. And they were like, oh, best 2 weeks of training ever. Like, I'm lifting weights I've never lifted before. Like, I'm recovering faster. I'm doing more volume. Like, everything is awesome. And so it seems like, like not only were they stronger 2 weeks prior, like they reported during those intervening 2 weeks, best 2 weeks of training they'd ever had. Then he had them max again. He told half of them, yeah, you're still taking steroids. And he told the other half, psych, you've been taking a placebo pill this whole time. And so if these people are rational, they realize like, oh, wait, these numbers I hit 2 weeks prior, I did that. It was all me, no steroids. These 2 awesome weeks of training I just had, that's all me, no steroids. But they regress back to their initial numbers. Like the 4 to 5% stronger that they got, automatically, poof, it goes away. And then the people who thought they were still on steroids hit about the same numbers that they'd hit 2 weeks prior, still 4 to 5% stronger over baseline, and a handful of them PR'd again. So, like, just due to the fact that those were already like elite, like world-class level lifters, like those results were huge. Then the other study by Ariel et al. From 1974, it was a training study. And what they did is they had, so he recruited a bunch of guys and told them, you're going to train for 7 weeks, and the ones of you that get the strongest over this 7-week period, I'm going to give you free steroids. So one, like the training they were doing on the front end was incentivized. Like they had an incentive to train hard because they were going to get free gear out of it. Then after those initial 7 weeks were up, he instead of actually picking the people who made the best progress, he took a sample of those people who had just trained for 7 weeks. But it was like pretty much all of the initial sample. Like I don't think he left that many people out. Had them train for another 4 weeks, giving them placebo pills, and tested their max at baseline after week 7, and then after the 4 weeks that people thought they were on steroids. So from week 0 to the end of week 7, they put an average of 10 kilos on their squat, bench press, standing military press, and seated military press, all combined. So like not many gains. And then over the next 4 weeks, they put an average of 45 kilos on those 4 lifts combined. So they made like 4 times as much progress basically in barely more than half the time. So like rate of progress increased like 7-fold. And again, like the only difference is they thought they were taking steroids. So in terms of like how I would interpret that, I think I think it would be easy to like overinterpret it, right? So you can't necessarily anticipate that sevenfold increase in rate of progress over 4 weeks is going. You can't extrapolate that out 20 years to an entire training career, clearly. And then also like when you're dealing with the placebo effect, like the placebo effect isn't like just a thing with a fixed magnitude. Like it varies based on like the perceived strength of the placebo. And so like in an experimental setting like that, they could have people who could like deceive them and convince them that like, hey, you're actually taking steroids. But like you can't do that to yourself, you know?
Exactly.
Um, like like I can't just go on Amazon and just like type in steroid pills, close my eyes, click the first thing. It's not steroids because they're selling it on Amazon. But like, you know, close my eyes, click the first thing, buy it, not know what it is, and like convince myself that it's steroids. Like that's just not going to work. Um, and it could very well be like corticosteroids and like make me weaker. Um, so like, yeah, like you're probably not going to be able to replicate that same effect on yourself in the first place. Although it is possible that people who intend to use steroids are doing that. So some research that's looked at like the purity and potency of uh, like um, like underground steroid labs, like the stuff they sell, something like 15 to 20% of the products they sell is like D-ball or like Anavar or something like that, is like mostly androstenedione, which doesn't do anything unless someone has like clinically depressed testosterone levels. So like there's probably some people out there who do think they're actually pinning steroids that are pinning a placebo and probably still making good gains off of it. Um, but yeah, so under normal circumstances, it would be very difficult to induce that effect on yourself. And I don't think like changing beliefs about yourself are going to have the same effect as like changing your belief about whether you're taking steroids or not. But I do think that general principle is sound, where if you're going into something like fully expecting to make good progress, you're probably going to do better than if you go into something like skeptical about whether or not you're going to make good progress. I'm not going to profess to know exactly mechanistically how that occurs. Like it could just be like a belief thing affecting effort. So, you know, if you go into something and your strong belief is that, you know, if I really apply myself to this, things are going to work out well, you're probably going to train harder and put more effort into it than if you go into it thinking like, probably not going to get much out of this in the first place, but may as well give it a shot. Like that's not as motivating. You probably just don't train as hard. So like I think that's probably or likely the main thing going on. But yeah, so I think that I think that beliefs about oneself and one's potential do impact the progress one will make. I certainly think that like the total amount of progress one can expect to make across a training career, I think that's primarily just biologically constrained, and so you can't like believe yourself into being Ronnie Coleman. But I think it's more of like two ceilings. So you have like a biological genetic ceiling that you have literally no idea where that is. Like that is an unknowable quantity. And then you also have like a mental ceiling where you just have blocks and it's hard to progress past. And so like the key is to make sure whatever your mental ceiling is, like wherever that block is at or above your actual genetic ceiling. Just to make sure that that's not going to like artificially limit you. The drawback to that approach is you're probably going to wind up less satisfied with your training. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people like to convince themselves they have bad genetics, because it's then if they don't make good progress, like it's not as psychologically painful. Like if you go into something with low expectations, failure doesn't hurt as much, you know? So, you know, if no matter how strong you are, if you think how strong you should be is, you know, 100 kilos stronger, at some point you're not going to be able to keep getting 100 kilos stronger, and you wind up disappointed, and like that sucks. So like it's less psychologically coddling to go about it that way, but it's probably going to set you up for better physical results in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. You know, I heard a cool story like a while back. I don't know who said it or where I heard it, but basically, apparently, some U.S. lifters like went into Europe, and you know how we Americans are with like kilos, like they have no idea what a pound is, what a kilo is, and most people. And so basically, they went into the gym and they were like, 20 kilos, what's that? And someone said to them, well, it's 2 pounds. Oh, okay. So 200 kilos is 400 pounds, right? Right, okay. And basically, one guy just loaded, I don't know, let's hypothetically presume that his max was like 400 pounds previously. And he was like, well, 200 kilos is 400 pounds. So, hey, let's try that. And he lifted 200 kilos and he was like, okay, that was easy. Let's load up 220. That's 440. And I don't know where the story ended or where he stopped or where he failed, but basically like he lifted like 60-70 pounds more than he ever lifted, because he just thought that, hey, 400 pounds is like 200 kilos, meanwhile 400 pounds is just 180 or so. So he was way off, but this is once again a cool story to illustrate this point.
I actually did that to a buddy one time. So I used to coach at a gym that like primarily catered to weightlifters. Brought one of my powerlifting friends in. There were pound plates in the gym, but most of the plates were kilo plates. And he was like, he could not squat 5 plates, which in Europe would be 220. In the US, it's 495, which is 225. Like he just could not squat that. And like he could do 485, so he could do like 202 for like 3 reps, like 3 or 5 reps. So like he was absolutely good for 5 plates. Like there was no doubt in my mind. But like he just saw that 5th plate on the bar and he'd shit the bed. And so like I told him the exact same thing. He's like, what's the pound to kilo conversion? I'm like, kilo's about 2 pounds. He's like, isn't it like 2 point something? I'm like, yeah, it's like 2.004 or something. Like it's not enough to make a difference. He's like, okay, cool. And so like we're working up. 200 is easy. 210 is easy. 220 is easy. And that's like right at his old PR. Hits 240. It's a little bit of a grind, but it goes right up. And so that's like 529, which is like considerably more than he'd ever done. Then he tries 250, which he now thinks is 500, which is the weight he always shits the bed at. And you know what happens. Like he looked with 250 the same way he would typically look with 225 if he was using pound plates. And he was like super frustrated. He's like, failed at the same place again. This sucks. And I was like, psych, you just did 529 and barely failed 551. And he was like, oh. And he was like, and from that day on, he never had a problem squatting 5 plates. But I feel like that's almost different though. Well, I don't know. I guess that is like somewhat similar to like the acute steroid study in the British lifters, but that's less of like, I feel like at that point you have like a less valid baseline almost, because in that case, like he had a specific mental block, seeing like a particular number of plates on the bar, whereas like if your max is like 475, which isn't like any particular like pretty increment, the difference might not be as dramatic. But yeah, like I've used that approach. That's how I got my wife to bench 135 the first time. So she would always freak out whenever she would see like a 45 on each side of the bar. And so just like working up one time, I just used like a random assortment of like 10s and 5s. I was like, I'm too lazy to grab the 25s. Like, don't worry about it. And she ended up like hitting 135. And I told her, she was like, oh, really? And I'm like, yep. She was like, put a plate on. So we put a plate on. She got it. And then like 135 was good from then on out. So yeah, like I see that. I don't know that that's the exact same thing though. I see it as more of like getting past a specific mental barrier. I guess it's similar though.
Yeah, I think it just conveys the same message that you shouldn't, like you said, you shouldn't limit what your capabilities are to what your perceived mental barriers are. And in general, it's better to take the attitude that I have a good genetics and this is going to work and I'm going to make great gains than the opposite attitude, because it's just not really helpful.
Correct. No, I very much agree with that.
Okay, so let's touch on the importance of the influence and the dream you train at. Because, there is this old, usually bodybuilders say that you can train anywhere. And I agree, you can train anywhere. You can train the same way anywhere. So I know you had some experience with this. Like, you were obviously, I guess, fortunate that you started properly lifting in a very serious gym. I remember you telling stories that Travis would just like come and squat your max weight from warm up just to mess with you guys. Something like that. So that must be fun. And on the opposite side, we have commercial gyms where, like I said, anyone who like deadlifts over 140 is like, oh, you're strong. Like over 200 is like, oh my goodness, you're the Hulk. So how much do you think that has, how much impact that has, and what can we do if we can't just all go to a hardcore powerlifting gym and whatever, train with the strongest people in the world?
So I definitely think that makes a difference. One of the things I've noticed is like just the mindset people have when they have versus haven't trained with people who are very, very strong is just completely different. So like there are individuals out there in the world who make statements such as, if you bench more than 3 plates, there's like a 99% chance you're on steroids, which like, to me, that just sounds crazy, because unless you're like 60 kilos, if you're a competitive powerlifter, like a 3-plate bench is basically just the price of admission. I'm used to that being like okay, now you can kind of do something type weight, not a holy shit, that person is strong type weight. You know what I mean? Yeah. And to me, when I see someone benching more than 5 plates, I'm like, okay, that person's a pretty fucking good bencher. And so it's, it's like that, and then when someone's benching like over 600, then I'm like, okay, maybe this is finally a cause for a little bit of skepticism. Not that I don't think there are people who haven't benched more than 600 raw and drug free. Like I certainly do, but that's kind of the number where it's like, okay, like not too many people do this. And I think part of that is just like my introduction to powerlifting was like, I was like a 14-year-old kid, and everyone I was training with was juiced to the gills and big. So Travis, he was like, I don't think it's a secret that he used to take steroids. I don't think I'm giving anything away there. But like, he competed at 100 kilos. He would walk around in the off season at like 110. And then everyone else in that training group was like 125 or bigger. Except for this guy, Seth, who was like, about 80 kilos, but like just freakishly strong and explosive. But like, the first meet I did, I weighed in at 69 kilos. Like I was a little dude. And all of these guys were at least 10, 15 years older than me, had been training for way longer, were way bigger and way stronger than I was. And so first like year and a half of training, like I was hitting numbers already that were like national or world records for like my age and weight class, but every time I would go to train, I was so much weaker than anyone else in my vicinity that I never thought, "Oh, I'm strong." It was like "Oh, I'm really weak and these people are very strong." And so like since there's this big of a gap between me and them, I clearly have a lot of room to improve. Um, and like I think that mindset did help a lot. Because, yeah, once Travis got a job in Chicago, that crew kind of broke up. And then I did hit a pretty hard wall for a while. But then in terms of like a practical strategy that someone could use to potentially get past that, one of the things that did it for me is I made a YouTube playlist of all of the like world records, both tested and untested in my weight class, the weight class below mine, and the weight class above mine. Like, because I wasn't quite sure what weight class I wanted to be in yet. So just kind of the range of weights I might be at. And then I also had a playlist of like old Ed Cohn lifts. And like every morning, every day before I would go to the gym, and like every night before I would go to sleep, I would just watch through that playlist. So like I'm every single day seeing people who are about my size lift way more than I am. And so like that just kind of like kept that in mind, like always top of mind, that like, okay, like people my size can lift this amount of weight. Why shouldn't I? And like until I did eventually end up getting quite strong, that very well could have been a completely irrational belief. Like, I didn't know that I could get that strong until I actually did. But just like that was my self-talk. Like I would see that like, okay, at least this much is possible. So like that's what I'm aiming for. And so that kind of like helped me break through that mental barrier and start making good progress again.
Very cool. And I really like the these people do it, why can't I do it attitude. Do you know Valentin Tambosi?
Yeah.
So he trains like at Das Gym, and he at one point like he was training, or I don't know if he still trains with this other guy who is like in hands, and he was saying that hey, if he's pressing, I don't know, on this machine 4 plates per side, why can't I press it? And that's cool. It's awesome if you have a training partner that's way stronger than you. Because again, you can take the attitude that, hey, he's taking steroids and I will never be able to achieve it because he's taking steroids. Or you can use that as motivation. That, hey, if he can do it, I can do it too.
I actually like training with people on steroids because I like to have like kind of an underdog mentality. Because like I don't have that much. Like I clearly had a good draw for lifting, and just in most things in life, I haven't been an underdog. Like I'm a white dude in America. Like things are good for me. And so like there is kind of something I like about training with someone who's like also pretty gifted and on steroids and stronger than me. Cause then it's like, I go into the gym every day thinking like, okay, like I'm at a disadvantage here. Like they got something going for them that I don't have going for me. So like I better work extra hard and that'll help me catch up. And again, that may not be like an entirely rational belief, but like I feel like one of the problems around this entire conversation, and then also just kind of like the like quote unquote evidence-based community in the first place, is people aren't good at distinguishing between what might be rational and what might be useful. 'Cause like when I write something on the website, I'm going to say like, what we have the best evidence to support. I have had some articles about mindset that you've referenced, but like when I'm just talking like pure performance and physiology, I'm saying like, okay, like here's what the data suggests. These are kind of the ranges of stuff that people can expect. But then in terms of like my own personal self-talk, like it's completely different from that. Um, like from day one, I just like set my sights at the moon. Like I got into lifting pretty soon after Andy Bolton pulled the first 1,000-pound deadlift, and like he did it equipped and on steroids. But I was like, you know, why can't I do that? And I think I've been training long enough that I can be reasonably confident I'm never going to pull 1,000. But still, like that's like where I set my sights, and like still to this day, like I've been muddling around in the sevens for years now, but like I'd still kind of like to pull 9, and like the next jump is 8, but like I'm not thinking 8, I'm thinking 9. And like one of so like we had a PR board at the gym when I first started training, and Travis's bench PR was 545. And so like the most I've ever benched is 485. So like I should be thinking 5, but I'm thinking 550. You know what I mean? So like, and like at this point, man, like I've been training 15 years. Like the rational part of my brain knows that like those may not be numbers that ever happen, but the self-talk and like the goal setting, at least for me, that I found to be the most effective is the, set my goals way higher than where I currently am. So then, when I go for 500 on bench, it's not going to get in my head because I'm not thinking about 500. I'm thinking about 50 pounds more than that, So yeah, those are probably quite irrational beliefs, but they're very useful. Like rational facts aren't always the most like useful things to believe in order to accomplish a goal. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of people do a good job distinguishing between factfulness versus usefulness.
I was just thinking of that conversation between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And did you listen to it? The first one.
Yes.
So basically the entire conversation, like 1.5, 2 hours, however long it was a talk about what's true objectively and what's useful. And Sam was going on about what's true, and Jordan was talking about what's useful and what's helpful in life. And that was the entire disagreement.
Well, wasn't that whole talk framed around what is true though?
But in practice, like what Jordan was referencing was a more accurate description of what's useful, because the examples basically he was talking about what's keeping you alive and what's keeping alive the earth, whatever, the humanity in general. And that's what he said, that for example, if something led to the extinction of life, then it's not true enough, something like that.
I think he played pretty fast and loose with terminology in that discussion, but that's another discussion for another day.
Exactly. I just got into my mind that that's a very good example of that sort of distinction. One of my aims with this podcast is to leave people with actionable items and stuff that they can actually take and implement into their own trainings and lives. Because at this point, I don't really have a whole lot of time or use for just random things that I can't really implement. I mean, I like to know them or learn about random facts just for the sake of it, but I'm much more interested in things that are also beneficial and helpful and I can do something with. So
I'm more of the persuasion that I just like to learn things for their own sake, because I feel like I feel like if you focus purely on what appears to be immediately useful, you might like cut yourself off from ideas and breakthroughs down the road. A book I would really strongly recommend to you and to all of the listeners, it's a book called Where Good Ideas Come From by, I believe, Stephen Johnson is the author. One of the ideas in that book is the adjacent possible. And that's essentially the idea that like new knowledge is gained like one little bit at a time, and generally not in big chunks. And it usually just comes from like the boundaries of our current knowledge. You can often like if you know enough, you can ask interesting questions whose answer becomes like new knowledge or like a small breakthrough that you can then add to the body of stuff people know that other people can then build on, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of times, like, the ability to come up with a good new idea, you don't know what you need to know to get there. And the best approach just tends to be like knowing a lot of stuff. And a lot of that stuff may turn out to never be useful, but you don't know what bit of it will turn out to be useful until it does, maybe months or years down the line. And so, like, one of the criticisms I get a lot with my website is, like, there's a lot of information here. A lot of it is useful to me in my training, but like, there's a lot of like just background, like pure science information that, like, why do I need to know this? When am I ever going to need to use this in the gym? And if you're looking at it purely from a perspective of like, what can I apply to my training tomorrow? Like that is certainly like a fair and valid criticism. But I see it more as like educating lifters for the long run, where, maybe like some little tidbit they picked up that wasn't useful at all when they read it helps them like make a realization about their training and something they should tweak, 2 years down the line. So yeah, like I certainly get, especially like in a podcast format, because I think like relaying denser scientific information is probably better suited to writing. But yeah, I'm not criticizing like the format of the podcast at all. But I did just kind of want to get that out there, that there is like absolutely a lot of value in just learning things, even if you have no idea what you're ever going to do with them.
My only problem with this is, again, time. I mean, if we all had unlimited time, believe me, I would like to learn so much. Like, I would love to learn a ton of dances, and I would start training like MMA, like seriously, and all that. But unfortunately, we're kind of limited. So
one of the things I recommend to a lot of people is to read textbooks, because in terms of just like density of well-vetted, generally true information that you may have not come in contact with, like the density of that in a textbook will probably be considerably higher than pretty much any other source. And so if you assume the typical textbook's like 500 pages long or something like that, if you just read 10 pages a day, you're knocking out a textbook every like month and 3/5 ish, or like month and 2/3. And so you can get through, I should have said 600 pages. That would make the math easier. You get through like 7 or 8 textbooks a year, which, like, if you're talking like exercise science and nutrition, like you can do exercise physiology, you can do anatomy and physiology, you can do a basic biomechanics book, you can do a more in-depth biomechanics book, you can do sports nutrition, and then you could potentially get into like sports psychology or something like that. And there's like 6 textbooks. You could probably get in 1 or 2 more throughout the course of a year. And like, if you read those, at that point, you're going to have like a pretty good grasp on the field. And like, obviously there will be a ton of details that are published in like individual studies that haven't made their way into textbooks yet that you would still be blind to. But like, that's a tremendous amount of information to be able to get through in a year. And then like, if you want to make sure it's cemented the next year, just go back and read those textbooks again, but like, mostly picking up on like stuff that you were hazy on or missed, and like skimming through it at a slightly faster clip of maybe like 20 pages a day. And then like in 2 years, you've pretty much like cemented somewhere around an undergrad to graduate level education for free. I was going to say for the price of the textbooks, but like, dang it, what's the site again?
Oh, I know, Library Genesis.
Yeah. Library Genesis. So you can find most textbooks you want on Library Genesis. LibGen. So yeah, I mean, there's clearly a limited amount of time in the day, but you can relatively efficiently pick up a ton of information.
Oh yeah, I agree. I was referring to things outside of your field. Like obviously this would be related to my field, but like you said, unrelated information. Like I don't know, you start reading about economics and history and I don't know, geography or music, something like that, which is like totally unrelated. That's what I mean. Or doing activities that are outside of your competence, that just for fun because they might help you.
No, yeah, for sure. I was more talking about like just learning information like within your field that may not be directly relevant to application.
Let's end it here because you have been more than generous with your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I will make sure to link in the description all of your resources. I will link to your website. I will link to Mass, which I am subscribed to, and people should definitely check out. I have, I don't know, since 2 years ago, probably have abandoned reading direct studies, mostly due to lack of time. I just read the controversial ones, like the 45 set per week type of studies, just because people seem to get too they get too emotional about it, so I have to check them out to see what's up. But other than that, I mostly just read Mass, and I follow people on social media and listen to stuff to keep updated. So that's an exceptional resource you put out there with the other guys.
Well, thanks, man. Everything around that study, that was such a clusterfuck.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks again, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thanks for having me on. Have a good one.
Alright, so that was episode 35 of the Muscle Engineer podcast with Greg Nuckols. I hope you enjoyed it and you find it interesting and or helpful. Now, as usual, I will leave you guys with some of my practical takeaways, of which there will be 2 today. The first one is something that Greg mentioned, which is to not set limitations for yourself, or if you do, make sure to set them high as fuck. So if you think you can achieve a certain lift, make that 100 pound higher. So if you think you can achieve a 500 pound squat, make that 600. Because hey, you might not hit 600, but you might hit 550. And that's certainly better than if you would have shot for 500 and you would have hit 450 instead. So just as a general rule of thumb, aim for the stars. Basically, it's what we are trying to say here. And the second part is the gym where you train at. So if possible, don't train in a commercial gym. Now, I understand that money and time are 2 factors most people care about, but if you're serious about lifting, seek out the gym with the biggest people, seek out the gym with the strongest people, and also a gym where it has plenty of equipment, but also where you can train hard, where they bang some hard music, where you won't hear clubbing crap, where the light doesn't look like the inside of a nightclub. All of those are pretty much factors that would already tell you that this gym is not for the serious lifters. Like, if your gym resembles a nightclub, there are people who take selfies in every corner and half of them doesn't train legs. You should probably get out of there if you want results and you're serious about your training. So those will be my 2 top takeaways. And that was episode 35 of the Muscle Engineer podcast. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you all in the next episode.